One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
So here we go. We've got the first of our new season of paint-alongs. We picked out 12 new Reaper miniatures, and we're going to be painting a new one every Sunday for the next 12 weeks or so. I think there's 1 week we're not going to be here, and the last one is on a Friday, not on a Sunday, just so we can go to a local convention. So, just for those of you who are new to this, we'll paint the mini slowly. I'll talk about everything that I do so that the idea is that a beginner or somebody who's learning foundation skills can follow along and learn a bit about foundation skills and kind of get some practice at those things as we go, and also have the chance to ask questions if you want to. And if you want live feedback, you can just drop a photo in the chat group on the Discord server, and be happy to see what your work looks like and give some feedback. Now, these are going out on the Miniature Monthly Discord channel, Miniature Monthly Twitch, and my own Hecatina Miniature Painting Studio Twitch. And on the Miniature Monthly Twitch stream, it automatically rolls over onto video on demand for the next 2 weeks. So if you can't stick around for the whole thing, or you want to go back and take another look, it'll be there for 2 weeks. And then sometime in that same time frame in the next 2 weeks, the videos of this will get uploaded onto YouTube, and they'll be there on the Miniature Monthly, the YouTube channel, until somebody chooses to take them down. So, be there for a while. So this is Rictus the Undying. He's available from Reaper Miniatures. He's available both in pewter and in their Bones USA material. And there will be links to both the metal and bones figures in the description of this video. There will also be a link to the Discord channel. If you're watching this on YouTube, there's a link to the Discord channel where we do these every week in the description of this video as well. And there might be some other links in the description, but those are the ones that I can remember that Aaron told me to tell you about. So there we go. All right, so the aim for this guy's pretty cool. He's got this really nice cloak. He's got some interesting armor features. It's really cool sculpt. And what I'm going to do today is we're going to give him sort of a ghostly look. Not ghostly, but more like... so he's an undead guy, and what we're going to do is focus on the upper part of him so that the upper part is really in focus, and the lower part's going to be kind of faded out, dark, hard to see. So it's going to look more like just an upper body than a whole guy, a whole undead. And if it all works out, we're going to have a fancy green gem on here, and we're going to give a little bit of a blue glow to his eyes, and we'll do a little bit of a blue object source lighting effect around his eyes. So we're going to give him dark colored armor, we're going to give him some bone, and then we're going to really corrode and rust the armor that's visible. And yeah, that's the general plan. We'll give him, I'm not sure quite yet what color I'm going to do that cloak, probably a dark purple, and then we'll make that look all ragged and beat up as well. So that is the plan for the day. As always, there is a list of paints that's been recommended, but you don't have to, wrong one, that one. You don't have to use the same paints. These are just suggestions, and these are the paints that I'll use in the class or the paint along today. But you don't have to have the same color. Something similar will do the job. We're going to be talking more about technique than about specific paints. All right, so let's go back to our project view and let's get the show rolling. So the first thing I got to do that I always seem to forget to do at the start of these things is put my eyes on so that I can see what I'm doing. There we go. I was actually at a painting class over the weekend, and a lot of people were there that were older, that had glasses on and that were struggling to see what was going on. And they seemed very reluctant to wear magnifiers for some reason. I'm not sure why that would be, but they were. And if you need magnifiers, just wear them. You don't want to have to fight against your tools. You don't want to have to fight to be able to see what you're doing. So if you need magnifiers, nobody's going to care. Just wear them and don't be embarrassed. All right. So we are going to start out by painting. We're going to use this black and brown color. And we're going to start by putting a base coat on the cloak and the other pieces of cloth with this black and brown. And I know I just said that we were going to paint the cloak purple. I may have changed my mind between staying that and starting to paint. That's just kind of the way things go. So the base coat on the cloth, you don't have to be super careful with this, but it's good to be kind of aim in the general direction of the cloth. When we start highlighting, the light direction is going to be pretty important. My overall light direction is coming from above his right shoulder, so coming down this way. And his eyes are going to be the object source lighting kind of glowing point. So we're going to enhance the highlighting in about a 1 centimeter ring around his eyes. So that's going to be the main focus of the mini. Okay, and when we start highlighting, we'll just have to keep that in mind. But for this stage, we don't have to really worry about that too much. We're just going to reach in there, past the armor, past the bones and all those things, and get his get a coat of dark brown, this black and brown. I'm using it because when you thin it, it looks like a warm brown, and when you put it on straight and it's dark, it's quite opaque, it's a very, very dark brown. It's not quite like a walnut dark black brown, but it's pretty darn dark. And that's going to be good for giving our miniature an overall dark look, which is what I want today. A little bit of cloth on his arm. I'm not super concerned about the brush direction doing this. This is just an initial base coat. And normally you would want to be very careful to go slowly and make a smooth base coat. But today we are going to really beat this guy up. It'd be similar to the cloth that we did on the Friar Stone at the end of the last, on the 10th episode from the last season, where we gave him all kinds of different leather and cloth colors, and then we made it all very weathered and ragged looking. We're going to do something similar to this guy. So I'm just painting all of this cloth, this black and brown color. Now he's got gloves, so I'm going to paint the gloves this black and brown color as well as the base for the leather. I'm going to let this color get onto the hilt of his sword as well, and right in the back there. I'm not worried about that being too distinctive looking, using a couple different colors for that or anything like that. I'm just going to live with it. Okay, and paint his leather gauntlet. I think he might have metal on his knuckles, but for now we're painting this as though it's all going to be some sort of fabric. I'll do his other arm. Make sure I get right underneath there because we don't want any light spots to show when we're done. And we'll get the strap and the glove on this hand as well. Strap on the shield, glove on that hand. And, this might be a good color to be the background of our shield as well. So I'm going to paint the whole inside of the shield this black and brown color. A little bit hard to reach. I just have to kind of wiggle the brush to get the color in there. Doesn't have to be perfect. Just want it to be covered. Okay, and then the cloak. Make sure we get the hem around the bottom. Get the inside of the cloak as well. Make sure we get that inside edge. I'm not too worried about this getting onto his armor. Like I said, we're going to weather this guy. So if you do get lots of brown on the armor, don't worry about it. We're going to put lots of rust and beat up scratches and dents and everything in this guy anyway. So it's not going to matter. Get this bit of cloth above his arm. think the last time I painted this guy, I gave him a tartan cloak, and I used like a red-violet color for all of his cloth. I might be misremembering that, but I think that's what it was I did. And let's do all the rest of the cloak now. I'm still working pretty much all in one direction. So that's one of the tricks for base coating. Like, I don't want to go up and rebrush where I've already painted, because it'll kind of start to tear up the partially dried paint. So if I keep working in one direction away from the paint that's already drying, there's less chance that I'm going to tear up the paint. I'm looking for a particularly dark color, but if I wanted this to be smooth, I could, instead of putting it on really opaque, I could thin the paint a little bit, put on a couple of slightly thinner coats, applying that same principle of not repainting an area until it's properly dried, and then I get a nice smooth base coat on there. He's got a little bit of a collar sort of looking thing in there, and I don't know whether that should be cloth or armor. So I'm going to err on the side of, I'll decide later, and I'm going to paint that zone in around his throat with this very dark brown. I think I'll paint a little bit around the edge of his helmet as well, for just no reason at all. Just feel like it. But I'm not going to paint those eye sockets, because those are going to be my light source later on. Okay, so there we go. That's all nice and dark. And now, while that's drying, I'm going to get some metallic paints, put them on the palette. So the metallic paint I'm going to use for my base coating is going to be Reaper Honed Steel. Did that. Okay. So yeah, honed steel, you want to give this a good shake. It's kind of a soft paint. Not soft, but it separates quite a bit. So give it a good shake. Need a fair bit of this. And I don't want to use it straight in this case. I'm going to mix some of this brown into it. So that I get a much darker color for the armor. That's about what I want. So it's about 1/3 dark brown or blackened brown, and 1/3 that armor color, or that honed steel. And now I'm going to systematically paint all of the armor, including his sword blade, this color. So I'm going to start right in the middle here. Start with this little bit of scale mail that's coming down around his helmet, and then do that breastplate of his plate armor, and then from there I'm going to keep working my way clockwise around the mini, getting all the armor. If you get a bit of metallic paint on the cloth that we already painted, that's all right. The cloth already has this same dark brown color in it, so it should be fairly easy to cover over the metallic mistakes later with a bit of a layer of darkened brown or blackened brown. If the brown that you picked is kind of light, you can always mix a bit of black in with the armor color as well to get that really dark looking metal. Also, it's going to be slightly less reflective than normal, because when you add the matte paint into the metallics, you kind of thin out the reflective element of the paint, and it dries looking quite a bit duller than it would if you used the metallic paint straight. And that's going to enhance this idea of it being very rusted and corroded and beat up old armor. Oh, have I forgotten to... No, I've done all that. I don't know. I'm on track, I think. All right. So just keep systematically working my way across the model, painting all of these little elements. Anything which is metal is getting this dark brown, corroded, crappy, decayed looking color. Do the other leg. So as I'm making my way around here, I'm kind of running out of paint a little bit. That's all right. We can always make some more. It's not a very complicated mix. It's basically just a little bit of brown, a little bit of black, in a basic metallic color. Nothing super complicated about it. Complicated bit will come later. It's not going to be that complicated. I mean, it may sound a bit intimidating when I say we're going to have a little bit of a glow color coming from his eyes, but it's really not very complicated. But we're going to get this base coat on so that it dries, and then we can do lots of fun painting of colors on top of it. That's going to be the main aim of this paint along, is going to be doing rust and corrosion and that good stuff. All right, he's coming along pretty good. Keep making our way around. We'll do this other pauldron kind of thing he's got going on here. We get a little bit of armor underneath his shield, so make sure we get that bit. Back of his leg. Already did the front of that leg. And we want to make sure we reach up in here under the shield. Get those armor plates on the side of his body. They don't really need much. They just... If somebody turns your miniature upside down and wants to look at it from another direction, it's nice if all the work is, like, if all the details have actually been painted. They don't have to be like super crisply painted or lots of extra details on them, but they should be at least painted. That's one of the advantages of using fully painting the mini black to start with, is that if you do miss a spot, it's at least already painted black. So when somebody looks at the model from an unusual direction, the shadows are already full of black paint, so they look dark. Seems like a pretty basic idea, pretty obvious thing, but I see it all the time when I'm looking at people's models, that they really only look at their model themselves from that front full view, or look at them from above on the table, and they don't realize that they've got, you know, all those issues until, you know, the troop gets killed in their game and they knock it over on the table, and suddenly all this white stuff becomes visible where the model was painted with white primer, and suddenly now everybody can see it. Surprise. Alright, so we're just about done with this base coat. Keep going, give it a little bit. Last piece finished. There we go. Let's give it one more look at. Quite often when the metallics are wet, it's hard to see where you've missed spots. So just turn the model around in your hand, check it all the different directions. Change the light angle. There's a spot that I missed right there. And that'll make those spots more visible. See, there's a couple more right in the middle of the shield that I couldn't see. Now you'll notice I didn't put much in the way of water. In fact, I didn't thin these paints at all. But now they're starting to dry out on my palette a little bit. So I'm just going to put the smallest touch of water in there to get the paint flowing again. These metallic paints don't do very well when you thin them with water. The pigment and the reflective material tends to sort of separate out and the paints get a bit gooey. So avoid thinning them with water if you can. If you really need to thin them a little bit because your painting conditions are very dry, just use a bit of flow improver, tiny bit of flow improver. Will really help with that. Okay, so that's probably nearly dry. So the next thing I'm going to do, we want to put a base coat on the bone. So I'm going to put some, so I'm going to do two things. I'm going to put a base coat of a really dark bone color on the horns and on the visible bone. And I'm going to make a wash with nightshade purple. So I'm going to use the nightshade purple and the creamy ivory to create the base for the bone. And then I'm going to put a purple wash over all of it to really make it dull and gritty. I'm also going to use the nightshade purple when I'm doing the rust and the corrosion. So that's going to be quite helpful at this stage. Get that done. So tiny, like this nightshade purple is a very strong color, and it's one of the few colors that I've worked with in terms of Reaper paints that can actually stain your clothing. Just something to be cognizant of with this paint. And so it works really well to do things like stain armor, make tide marks and all that kind of good stuff that can help look like corrosion. So just a little bit of a lighter color mixed in with the purple, and that's going to give us our bone color. And the areas I'm going to paint this color, part of his spine is visible right in there. So that bit of spine is going to get this color. His arm is exposed right in there. That's a bit of bone. Okay, so we're going to put this bone color on that. Right up in there. Oops, did I go off screen? Right up in there. Just a little bit of it showing. And then it also shows at his elbow. Right there. Now, there's a lot of different ways to paint bone. I mean, you got to ask yourself, is it fresh bone? Is it bleached bone? Is it polished? Is it corroded? Is it rotted? And there's a lot of different ways you can do it. Key thing to remember is it's an organic material. So unless it's been like turned into a piece of jewelry or something like that, you don't want to be super, super smooth on it. It's all right to have it be kind of rough looking. Okay, so now I'm going to do, there was a little tiny piece of bone visible right in there by his elbow. And now we're going to do his face. So we put in quite a lot of black and brown around his face earlier. Try not to completely cover that. So having those shadows between the bone and the helmet is going to make that object source lighting that we're going to do look better at the end. So try not to completely cover the shadow between the helmet and the skull. But we are going to fill the eye sockets with this color. I'll just reach in there and carefully make sure that it's all, the entire eye socket is painted, because we need that as a base when we go to paint the white in there that's going to be glowing. Now some people, when they do this, like to do to have the inside of the mouth glowing as well. So we might as well do that. So let's paint the inside of his mouth this color as well, and those little shadows around his cheeks, or the little between the mandible and his upper jaw. Paint that this color, but again, try not to paint the shadows between the skull and the helmet. And then paint the horns this color as well. Yeah. Nice little base coat. All that. So that's essentially the two main colors of the figure. Done. We're finished. We can put the mini away now. All right. Give that a moment to dry. Now, eventually, this is going to be a bright green gemstone, and we need that to be black. So we're going to paint that nightshade purple right now. So essentially, nightshade purple is going to be our black on this mini today. So we're going to paint that whole sphere of the gem, fully paint it nightshade black. And later on, we're going to come back and we're going to paint that as a green gem. What have I forgotten? I don't think I've forgotten anything yet. Now, we do need to paint the base as well. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to use the same color, use the nightshade purple for the base as well. It's going to be a bit of a monochrome looking paint scheme, but I don't really care. So I want this color to be darker than the bone we painted earlier. So this is more like 3/4 nightshade purple and just a little bit of the creamy ivory. And I put just a touch of water in that because my palette's drying out pretty quick here. And then I'm going to paint all of these stones on the base this color. And the reason I'm doing that now is because I'm going to use the nightshade purple as a wash over all of this as well. Because remember, I want the bottom of the mini to be really dark colored, so that he looks a bit disembodied. So he looks more like he's just the upper part of a mini rather than the whole mini. There we go. Keep working my way around. The other thing I'm doing by doing this step is I'm buying time to make sure that the metallics in the bone are really dry before I do the purple wash over top of them. If you do that too soon, all that purple wash is going to do, the nightshade purple wash is going to do, is just grab a whole lot of metallic paint and other stuff and just reactivate it, and it's going to drip all over the place. We'll get silver metallic flecks all over the base, on the clothing, wherever, it's a place that we don't really want it. So I'm going to give it some extra time to dry while I finish painting this base. Now it's been very, very cold here the last little while. I mean, that's a bit of an understatement. We haven't had temperatures like that in a while. I think with they said it was going to be colder, but it only got down to a wind chill of minus 42 Celsius yesterday. They thought it was going to be colder than that. I know other parts of Canada it got much colder than that. But why am I telling you about that? Because when it gets really, really cold, the free moisture in the air is not as mobile. So things dry out very, very quickly. And it won't really dry out unless the temperature goes back above zero. Which it probably will in a couple of days, because it always does around here. It rains. It could be +5 tomorrow and rainy. All right, so now I'm going to make my wash. This before I bash on with that, I'm just going to double check, see if there's any questions to answer. Let's see here. Hey, thanks, Aaron. Oh, hey, Zox. Lots of people hanging out. All right. And all right, so checked all 3 of the chat rooms. Nobody's asking any questions yet, but if you do have questions, don't hesitate. Even Aaron, if you got questions, if you want to ask me, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? That's craziness. I didn't teach you that. You're more than welcome to heckle as we go. All right, so the wash that I'm making right now, I'm just adding water to the Nightshade Purple to really, really thin it out. I'll probably be down around 10 or 15 drops of water to 1 drop of paint by the time I'm done thinning this. But remember what I said at the start, this paint stains very strongly. So even a very, very thin wash of this is going to darken our shadows, but it's also going to leave lots of nasty looking water, tide marks and coffee stains, all those things, which is going to contribute nicely to our corroded and rusty looking effect. So just to give you a sense, on the palette it looks completely black. Let's see how thin it looks on the thumb. Okay, that's kind of what I'm looking for, right? Like when that dries, it's going to be quite horrible. It's going to have lots of tide marks. It's going to be gritty. It's going to be dirty looking. That's what I want. Maybe even thinner than that. But we'll see how the first couple of brush strokes look. So I'm going to start on the cloak at the back because that's on the shadow side of the Mini. I'm going to start right up by the top of the cloak and I'm going to pull the paint downwards in the folds of the cloak. I'm going to see what it looks like as it's drying. See if I want to make it thinner or not. So start right up around his neck. Keep pulling the paint downwards. I don't want to end up with a lot of big pools of this wash because it's mostly water. And even though it's very dry here right now, it could take a while to dry if I let it pool. I'll just keep moving the paint down the model. And in this case, like I said, I don't care if this is going to be very smooth. So don't worry about over brushing. It's just going to add a nice dirty, messy texture that might be helpful to the final look anyway. Okay, so did both sides of the cloak, front and back. I think what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to put a dot of this on the front, a couple of dots of that on the front of his armor. And why am I doing that? Because you'll be able to see what the patchiness looks like as this stuff dries. And then I'm going to go back to working my way around the figure. Okay, so I'm going to do the helmet. I'm quite happy with this. If yours seems like it's too dark, just add a bit of water to it. And remember, just keep pulling the paint downwards so you don't end up with a lot of big pools. Now, don't let this wash go into the eye sockets. Okay, you want to avoid the eye sockets. The aim is going to be to make the eye sockets as light as we can so that they look like the source of a light on the model. You can see that's already dried. It's left a nice, ugly looking cross mark on his chest. I like it. That's what we were looking for. All right. So we keep going. If you do miss a spot, like you see under the horn there, I missed that. Don't worry about trying to fix those tide marks because we kind of want those. Just keep adding the paint. So we're going to do this shoulder epaulette or this pauldron thing here now. Okay, and now I'm going to do the arm with the shield on it, do the whole arm. So I'll start at the top. Lots of paint on there. This is about, I've got quite a bit of paint on the brush as I'm doing this. I just keep moving the paint down the model. By down, I mean from the top down towards his base. So I just keep moving the paint downwards. Why am I doing that? Because it means that more paint is going to be deposited at the bottom than on the top, and that's going to help make the model look darker overall, look like it's lit from above, and it's in shadow at the bottom, and that's what I'm looking for. If you're wondering why I got inspired to do that, I was watching a documentary about the movie The Black Cauldron, which was a Disney movie that came out in the 80s, and I just got inspired by the animation of all the disembodied bodies of all the undead guys in that movie. Alright, so now I'm going to do the front of the armor, including that bit of spine that's showing. Exactly the same process. I just realized I should have explained a little bit what I'm doing. I'm going quite fast, but normally when I do a wash like this, I go slowly. So you allow time for the brush to let the paint flow into the low spot, so you just kind of go slowly along. I just realized I've been doing that process, but I've been doing it this is going to sound like contradictory, but I've been doing it quickly, and that's just because I've done this process a lot, so I'm used to kind of getting the paint to flow. But what you want to do, just go a little bit slowly and allow time for the paint to flow off of the brush into all the low spots. So one way to do that, press down a little bit harder on the tip of the brush, and that'll get more paint to flow off. And just keep reloading the brush with that really, really thin paint. And when you bend the bristles, it'll flow off into the low spots. All the way down. It's going to be a pretty grim, dark looking model. And that's not a reference to grimdark style, it's just going to look grim and dark. Okay, so that arm's done, the body is done, the helmet is done. Now we can do this last arm. So start at the top of the sword and pull from the top down. Make sure we don't let it pull too much. Pull down the body. Same thing on the back. We'll start at the top of the sword, pull from the top down. Make sure we get the whole thing. And I missed this what do you call that, pauldron on the way down, so I'm going to redo it. Give it some nice paint. And make sure we get the whole guy done. Okay. Pretty happy with that. It's drying fairly quickly. And now I'm going to do the base around these cobblestones. Now, if you're using the mini as produced, he's either got like a bit of a I can't remember what he's got on his base, whether he's got a tab. The metal guy has a tab, and the plastic one has a bit of a sculpted scenic base. But I'm going to have a consistent look and feel for all of the models we do on these paint-alongs. They're all going to have the same style, sort of 1-inch diameter Reaper display base. That's what I like to have on my gaming mini, so that's my plan. And that, if you decide that you don't like it, it's like too dark, you can always just get a little bit of water in your brush, and then go back and then just kind of wiggle the wet brush across the top of the stones or across the texture, and it will thin the wash even further, and you can kind of push that purple paint off of the top of the cobblestones into the crevices in between, and the water is going to make it even look worse with coffee stains, which is kind of what we want. So I'm pretty happy with that. Looking gross. That's what we like. Gross is good. So I'm just letting this have a bit more time to dry. As I rotate it in my hands and kind of let the light reflect off it, I can see where the water is, the very thin paint is still in the low spots drying. we're just going to leave those alone. Let them dry for a while until they're dry. And so what are we going to do in the meantime? In the meantime, there's a couple of things we can still work on. First one is we didn't paint any of the bone area on his face. Okay, so we can set the conditions for the little bit of a glow effect that we're going to do later. So what I want to do, the glow is going to be this blue phantom glow color. Okay, it's a very, very saturated, creepy looking blue. Hence the name, phantom glow, I'm guessing. So I can get some of that on the palette. And this is going to be my glow color. So what we're going to do is apply this color several times to the eye sockets and to the areas around the eye sockets as a bit of a foundation for when we eventually come back and do a little bit of a gentle glow effect. So the eye sockets are there. If the eyes are glowing brightly, you're going to get a little bit of a light on the edge of his helmet, right? Maybe a little bit on the edge of his shoulder, maybe a little bit on the edge of the shield or on that gem. We're going to pretend that it's going to get to the gem, but mostly it's going to have a little bit of a glow effect on the side of that sword blade. That's where it's going to end up being shown up, okay? Nothing too sophisticated. We're not doing any like super blending or that kind of stuff. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to get my... oh, I just grabbed the wrong color. Look at that. So there's my phantom glow. I'm going to move a bit of that off to the side, and I'm going to add a little bit of pure white in there. So that color, I'm going to put that deep in the eye sockets and in his mouth, okay? So, and we just keep your eyes open for any loose purple paint that's not dry yet. You don't want to get this mixed in with the purple paint. It'll pick it right up and make a mess. So we're just going to put a daub of that right in the center of the eye socket. Same thing in the other eye socket. It's okay if this slops outside the lines a little bit, because it's going to be glowing. So of course it's going to slop outside of the eye socket a little bit. And we're going to put it in his mouth as well. And make sure you get the roof of his mouth. We want that to be affected. And those little dimples between his mandible and his upper jaw. Get that paint right in there as well. So something I've talked about lots of times doing these paint-alongs is setting the right foundation for the colors you're going to paint. So what we've just done by adding this color is we've made it easier to paint our blue color straight over that to make a nice saturated blue glow color. And we made it easier to paint the white in the center of the eyes. And so the white is the center of the light source. This light blue color is kind of just out from that. And then the saturated blue, little ring around those eyes. And then we can mix the blue, put little reflections of it in the sword, on his armor, in the gem, that kind of thing. And that's the plan. All right, so still drying in the center of those little spots. Got to give it a couple more minutes. So what am I going to do in the meantime? I'm going to do something you should never do, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to paint the gemstone base color now, because I know that that is not wet. So I'll grab that green, and I'm going to grab the creamy ivory color, and I want a mix of that, which is going to be mostly creamy ivory. So remember at the start we painted that gem black. Now we're painting it this very light green color. And we're going to let it dry, and then at the end of the process we're going to paint this green as glazes over top of the gem to make it look kind of translucent, okay? And by having this very light color underneath, that's going to show through and help our help it look like light is reflecting through the gem. So remember I said our main direction of light's coming from above his sword. So for the gem, we're going to end up with the reflection dot at the top, and the light that passes through is going to be brighter on the bottom. Okay? So we're going to just start by painting a circle of this very, very pale green in the center of that gem, right in the middle of the shield. And I don't know, maybe that was sculpted to be a shield boss, like something like that. But in my mind, it's part of the cursed magic that's bringing this guy to life. So we've got the gem right in the middle there. Now we're going to paint that color one more time before we come back to do kind of the final gem glazes and stuff. Again, I'm just buying a little bit of time. I can still see it's a little bit wet inside those deeper spots. Just got to give it another moment or two. You could always take a hairdryer to it. I could use my airbrush, blow some air on it, but I can see it's very nearly dry. We'll just keep going as we're going. Okay, so that's the colors I'm going to be using for the gem. We'll just keep that set aside. That's the glow that we're going to do. We'll keep that ready to go. And now, while I'm still waiting for the purple to dry, I'm going to grab some of the pure white. Okay, just straight white, nothing mixed in. I'm going to work it with the tip of the brush a little bit. And then I'm going to put one white dot right in the center of each of the eye sockets. And this is the center of my light. Okay, it's going to be the center of the light. There we go. Doesn't matter if it's a little bit bigger than you planned. Okay, and it's totally okay to have it be fairly large. You want to make sure you get the top of the eye socket, because that's in a natural shadowed area, so we want to make sure that that's really, really light. So we paint the pure white right up to the top of the eye socket, like that. There we go. Already starting to look a little bit, well, as we intended. And I'm going to put another white line of that between his teeth, right in the center of the skull, like he's glowing from inside his mouth as well. There we go. A bit of white in there. Okay. So that's drying. This is almost dry. I'm going to go back. I'm doing my second coat of this. I'm using jade green. And this is mixed with the... I don't remember whether I use pure white or the ivory, creamy ivory. I don't think it really matters. Somebody will tell me. Okay, so a second coat of this color. Get a nice smooth start point for our gemstone. All right. Now. Okay, that's looking pretty good. So I think now I can start painting a few details. I mean, if you want a really, really dark, grim looking undead guy, we could just do a few little details and call him done, but that's not the plan for today. All right. Now, I am going to grab a synthetic brush. Where's the one I was using a minute ago? That guy. And I'm going to paint a little bit of silver on all of the armor, okay? Now, I'm just going to take that dollop of honed steel. I'm going to mix it on top of the paint I was using earlier, just so it has a little touch of that black and brown in it. It's not nearly as dark as the one we just put the wash over, but it's pretty dark. And I'm going to start basically stippling on little daubs of this paint. And that's going to create little shiny areas that'll highlight different parts of the figure. So, like I was saying earlier, we want the upper part of the body to be really the focus. So let's say this leg below this pointy kneecap, I'm not going to highlight anything below there. I'm just going to start up there, and I'm going to put dabs and dots of this new slightly lighter silver color on the top of anything facing upwards. So there's the pointy kneecap. Got that little bit of wing-like looking thing on his knee. And I'm looking for the parts of those objects that are closest to our light source, which is above this guy. So as I look at this thigh piece here, there's a dark line along the side of it, and I'm just going to basically hit the middle of his thigh armor with some dots on the side facing up towards the light. Good enough. Same with this little piece of armor on his hip. Little dots facing upwards. Little dabs of paint. I'm not looking for a perfect smooth coat of paint. I don't want that. I want him to look very beat up. But I do want to have definition of each of those pieces. So I'm painting each piece separately with little dots and dabs. And it's very irregular and focusing on the raised surfaces. Now you're probably wondering, why am I not just dry brushing this? I could, I suppose, but what that would give me would be a much smoother result. It'll either be smoother or streakier. And I don't really want it to be streaky. I want it to be spots, right? So you could dry brush this color, and then at the next stage, when I'm going to do the rust and corrosion, start doing the dots and things then. But I would like to have an irregular texture, make the armor look as beat up and bent up and damaged as possible right from the get-go. So that's the pauldron there. I'm going to do this other one. This has quite a bit of damage on mine. I can't remember whether I cut that with the file or something like that, or it's part of the sculpt. But if there are cuts and things like that in the armor, don't fill those with this paint. When it hit only the raised areas, preserve any shadows that have occurred from the washes, okay? And at the end, we're going to go back and we're going to decide if some of these scratches and things are fresh. And if we decide to make them fresh, we'll put shiny new silver paint on their edges to make it look like they were just inflicted on the armor, okay? All right, so there's the pauldrons done, the torso, that leg is done. So now I'm going to go down into the center here, and he's got this sort of codpiece thing going on. Actually, not really a codpiece, I don't know what that is, like a tabard or something. And the first, like, 3 or 4 of these, I'm just going to put a few dots on the side closest to our light source, but I'm not painting the whole thing. Just a few little dots and dabs on the raised parts. And I'm not going to paint any of the stuff under his shield. We leave that in the shadows, so that it looks really, really dark at the bottom. Next thing I'm going to do, let's do his helmet. So the helmet is basically a sphere. The light is coming that way. So I'm going to paint the dots on the helmet in the general direction of the light source in kind of a circular pattern. He's got this nose guard. I'll treat the nose guard as part of that sphere shape, but I won't cover. There's like a little shadow between the nose guard and the helm. I don't want to cover that over. Basically, anywhere that there's a dark line from the wash, don't cover it over. Try to preserve it. And if your dots and dashes and dabs and just little dots that you're making aren't perfect, it doesn't matter. We're going to go back over it, make it all rusty and corroded at a later stage. How are we doing so far? Oh, we're about an hour in. Okay. Do the back of the helmet. Keeping in mind the light direction's the other way now, so I'm painting the opposite side of the helmet from our perspective. Just keep it going in the same direction. Okay. There we go. Now, let's do this arm. This arm has this kind of bracer looking thing, and it's got 2 separate pieces. There's like a triangle shaped piece at the front, so we'll put some dots on that separately from doing the back half of it. And I'm only doing the upper half of that because I want the bottom to stay as shadowed as possible. We'll do the back of it the same way. Just don't come as far down along the bracer. Really keep in mind that the light is to the front of this. And you can see that little triangle shape more easily on the back of his wrist. Just the uppermost part of that facing the light gets the dots and the dabs and the little wiggly marks. Okay, coming along. The sword now. We've got this pommel. The light direction is this way. That's a sphere. So I'm going to do a round bunch of dots facing in the direction of the light source. I've got this cross hilt. I'm going to do that in a line across the top of that. I'm going to work my way around the side. This side of it, it's going to get dots on the edge. This back part doesn't need much. Just a few maybe. I'm not too worried about the bottom part of that. If I was worried about things like ground reflection or those kinds of things, I would do that now, but I want it to be quite dark. And then as we go up, we look at the blade. Remember, the light direction is this way, so I'm going to put some on the top of the blade. Okay, but we also going to have a little bit of light reflected from his eyes. So we're going to put like a sort of a semicircle ring, a slightly lighter metal color. So there's his eye. If his eye is going to light the sword blade, it's going to be just a little bit right around in there facing towards the eye. I'm just going to make that part of the sword a little bit lighter. And then we're going to do the top of the sword blade, way up here where the light would catch it. If you want to, you can kind of come down along the edge a little bit. You don't want to overdo it. We don't want this to look like a brand new, bright, paladin's sword or something like that. We want it to look old and cruddy and rusty, and that's it. Looking at it from the back, my paint's drying up super fast, so I gotta make some more. This part of the blade up here is going to be lighter. I'll just put some dots and dashes of this on the uppermost part of the blade. That's about it. That's about all I want on there. Okay, just enough for it to be visible. Now, we already did that other pauldron on the front. From the back, the light's coming this way. It might get a little bit of light on the back, but not much. Just a few little dots, that'll be enough. There we go. Now, the shield. On to the shield. I'm going to treat the whole shield surface as bare metal. And so I want, in fact, just the little bit of natural reflection of the first coat of metallic paint is still visible. You can see it as I rotate it there. That's the areas that I want to hit with it. So that piece quite a bit. And a little bit on that edge. A little bit on there. A little bit on there. But not much below the level of the gemstone. Really not much at all. So there we go. Let's start right up there. Do quite a bit on this part. A little bit up there on that rim. And then that sort of corroded looking area in the center. Like that. There's a little edge on that I want to get on that piece. And then just a little bit right in there. There's also this little ring around the gem. And we don't want to do the bottom part of that, but we do want to do the top. Just a little bit. Just be careful not to get this color on the gem if you can. If you do, it doesn't matter because we still got the paint on the palette. We can always redo it. There. Like that. So now he's starting to look pretty armory. I'll take it. Now, we do something for the cloth. The cloth needs a little bit of a highlight. So I'm going to grab this highlight orange. So my rust colors, I'm going to use a mixture of auburn shadow, rust brown, highlight orange, and purple. Not mixed together, just dots and things like that. So I'm also going to use the same orange color to create the highlights on the cloth. Recommendations for synthetic brushes for metallic painting. It doesn't really matter, you know, like we use these Taklon brushes quite a lot. Not sure what company they're from. They work pretty well, and they're cheap. I'm using the Winsor & Newton Cotman series right now. It's just a question of what you can get. I got these on sale, right? So I tend to use them for blending and that sort of thing. Once they're beat up, I switch over to use them for metallics and other things for textures, because they do get beat up pretty quick. And that's just a fact of life. I mean, synthetic brushes, most of them are nylon, and they're not very durable. So whatever you can get for cheap, keeps a point on it just long enough for you to do the technique that you want, and then put them in your dry brush pile or your terrain painting pile or whatever. Okay. So all I did was add a little bit of carrot, what is this, highlight orange into the brown, the blackened brown that I used as the base coat for the cloak, just to lighten it a little bit. And I'm going to use that first color as a highlight on all the cloth. Again, I don't want the cloth to look perfect. I want it to look kind of ragged. So you could do this a bunch of different. You could stipple it. You could make hash marks. You could put dots. You could, if you wanted to, make like smooth lengthwise highlights, and that would contrast with all the stippling we're doing on the armor. I'm just going to kind of put it on there, not too worried about making it look any particular way. I'm just going to kind of dab it on there where I think the light's going to hit. So I went a little bit further down there than I intended because I was talking, but I had been planning to keep this really on the upper part. So I'll do a little bit on the sleeve, the upper part of that sleeve there. I'm going to do just a couple of dots on that leather underneath his looks like a gorget he's got going on there. His neck. So the light coming this way, we'll do the top of the thumb on that leather glove. And a little bit on the palm so that the palm becomes defined. And then we'll do all these fingers. Just a little bit separate on the fingers. And we'll treat this whole glove as it's a leather gauntlet. So I'm going to put this on the top part of that gauntlet, just like that. This most uppermost bit. It's not getting a lot of light. And then there's a bit showing there of leather, or whatever that cloth is going to be. Rags, essentially, is what it's going to be by the time I'm done. Okay. And we want the back of his sleeve to be a little bit defined. Not too much. We'll just put a few little dots right on the uppermost part of that. And that's probably enough for the back of that arm. And the same thing for the cloak. We've already got a nice dark crevices in there. We want a little bit more visible than that. So bear in mind, I want the bottom to be dark and the top to be a bit lighter. So there's like a kind of a crease point in the middle of his back. I'm going to keep this color above that line. So I'm there's like a little tear mark right in the middle. That's going to be the boundary. I'm not going to go below that. And I'm going to just put little dots of this color on the raised edge of the creases and things in the cloak. And then work my way up from there, putting more and more little dots to kind of define that shape. So it's going to be pretty filthy looking when we're done, which is kind of what I wanted, right? No, it's not kind of what I wanted. It is what I wanted. Nice dots up there. Okay. I'm happy with that. I think I'm going to put one dot of this on the leather strap on the inside of the shield to just make it visible. There. Okay. Now, I'm going to make another mix of that orange. I'm going to add a little bit more orange in there. And I'm going to take a tiny little dot of ivory. So this orange is adding orange to the mix. And I need to lighten it as well. So I've added a little bit of ivory to make it lighter. And I'm going to add some more orange highlight to make it even more orange looking. There we go. That's about what I want. So that's quite a bit lighter color than the first one I put on there. Wipe the excess off the brush. And you notice I'm not putting water in it to thin it. If I start putting water in that, it's going to start going all over it's going to go out of control all over the place. And I want to be able to control where the stuff lands. So really need to constrain where these highlights are going to go now, and they're going to keep them in the upper part. So before I went quite far down, so on this little tabard bit at the center, I'm just going to put a couple of dots at the very top, and just a couple in there to make the shape visible. Up in here, there's some cloth around his, it's like his heart got torn out or something. Just going to define the cloth there. On this sleeve, with the light coming down, it's not going to catch very much, but I still want it to be visible. So just a few little dots on the top of that cloth above, on his arm, between the shield and the pauldron. On his left arm is where I'm doing that, just to make it a little bit more visible. And I'm going to do the same thing on the cloth on his right arm. I'm not going to do this on the leather gorget and his neck. That's got enough on it already. I'm going to put this on the bits of cloth along the bone on his arm. And I already defined his palm enough on his glove. So I'm going to do the thumb. And then the forefinger. But not directly under the hilt. Just where it comes out from under the hilt, where the light might catch it a little bit. Just enough for it to be visible. And we're going to do the same thing on the back. So just the very top edge of that glove. A few little dots and marks. And the knuckles. Just the top 2 or 3 knuckles, not all of them. We want the bottom to be in shadow. And then the cloth on his arm, just a few little dots to bring it up. There we go. Sound effects help. If you're not sure how much paint to put, just make a short noise, short paint. Big noise, big paint. Right? Little paint, big paint. If you think I'm crazy, it's entirely possible, but it seems to help. So, little noises, little dash marks on the most raised parts of the folds of the cloak. Last time I went down this far. This time I'm going half as far. So from the cloak to that little tear, I'm going to go halfway, which is about there. And I'm going to focus mostly on the side towards the light, which is this side. If you're not sure, you can always change the orientation of MIDI and look at it through the light direction. It's like that. So now we can see where the light would land. That's really only going to land in this topmost corner there. So that's the plan. Just going to define that last little bit. What do you do if you put too many dots on? If you make it too light? Well, we come back later and we put more dark dots on. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to put lots of dark stains on there and make it darken it back up again. Okay, I'm happy with that. So now we are going to do the spine and the bones and things. So, oh, that's the wrong brush. No, that'll work. I switched from my synthetic to Winsor & Newton size 1. Just to give me a little bit better control, with a little bit more precision, as I'm going to do the tiny little bones in his arm, in his spine there, and I'm going to do the horns. So we've already got this mix right here, which is a little bit of nightshade purple and mostly ivory. I'm going to refresh that with a bit of both. And now we're going to take that ivory, add a little bit more. So this is lighter than the color that we started with. Okay, it's lighter than the color we started with. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight the horns and the bone with this color. Now, we want the upper part to be highlighted, not the lower part. So I don't know if this spine in there really needs a bit of highlighting. So I'm just going to, this is a fairly dark color still. Just going to kind of, if you picture the vertebrae as being like not just a smooth cylinder, like it's got like pieces that come forward and pieces that go out. It's like an irregular shape, just look for those little irregular shapes, or create them if they're not there already, to make it look more spiny and bone looking in there. Okay. Do the same thing on his upper arm. I think it's the humerus, isn't it? Let's highlight the bone a little bit. We've got that little patch of bone inside his elbow on the other side. This probably does not need any highlight, but I feel like doing it, even though it's probably not correct. Did it anyway. If I'm wrong, oh well. Can always darken it up later. And then we've got this bit of bony elbow, which is protruding. The light's coming this way. So that is a round sphere-like shape. So I'm going to give it sort of a round bunch of little light-colored dots to make it stand out. There we go. So now we got the bones done. I didn't do this to his skull. Let's do... We don't need much because we're going to use this other color on there. Excuse me. Again, I'm trying to not use water just to keep control of it. I think I'll just do a little bit on the upper part of his cheeks. Not much at all. A little bit on the front of his chin. Now, where I'm going to do the object sort of lighting, it might seem that this is a waste of time. But if I have these areas well defined and have value highlights on them, so they're highlighted with lighter paint, when I go and put my glazes of my blue over it, it's going to look better. That's why I did that. Now, we're going to do the horns. These horns are going to get darker towards their tips. That's like what the horn color is going to be. So I'm going to make... So the tip is going to be darker, the base is going to be lighter, and they don't have to be smooth and regular. There are some sort of like cow horns or something. So I'm just going to... Oh, there's too much water in the paint. Look at that. That is out of control. Let's darken that up again. Thicken it back up with some of our ivory. I probably got a drop of water in the paint from the ferrule of the brush. You can see the effect that it's having on the paint. It's making it kind of beat up in the palette. There we go. So if my light's coming this way, the tip of this horn is going to get lit. And I'm going to glaze a darker color over this later. Okay. And then this lower part in here is going to catch the light. Now, you could always make it reflective by putting the highlight away from the light in sort of a further down around the round shape. A small, tight highlight like that position is going to make it look shiny, but I want this guy to look dead and dull, so I'm not going to do that. The light coming over that way, so basically all my highlights are pointing directly towards the light source because they're fairly dull. So the upper part of that curve, and then in here by the helm, we're going to make this lighter. Same thing on the back. Go. A little bit in there, and quite a bit out on that side. Okay, I like it. Add some more ivory in there, make a lighter color, and we're going to do the same thing again with highlights that are not quite as big. They're almost as big, but we just want to leave some of that last layer visible. There we go. Tip of the horn. And on this edge, because that's the main light direction, a bit in there where the light would catch. Same thing on the back. There we go. I And we need to go lighter than that because we're going to glaze a dark color over this. So I need to make these highlights quite a bit lighter. More ivory into the mix. And once again, slightly smaller highlights than last time. Way out towards the tip. There we go. Where the light would catch in the curve. Outside of the curve, on the side facing the light. And just a little bit on the top of the horn on the inside in there. There we go. I like it. Okay. And on the back too. Just give it a little quick bit like that. Put that on the tip there and a little bit in there. Because the light's going to come through and catch there, right? Okay. We need to let that dry a little bit. I'm trying to decide if that's light enough. I don't think it is. I'm going to give it a highlight with straight ivory now, which is going to look too light. But don't forget, I'm going to glaze it back down again. And darken it up. So the brighter this is, or the lighter this is, the better it's going to show through those glazes as a highlight. So just the most raised parts of the outside of that curve with the ivory, and the tip of the opposite side with the ivory. Just to really brighten up those spots. And if the glaze makes it too dark, well, we can always come back and lighten them up again. But we know we want that to be light, so we'll be careful. Okay. Pretty happy with that. So what's next? Next is going to be lots of rust. So let's start doing our rust. So for the rust, we're going to use purple, auburn shadow, rust brown, and orange highlight. And what we're going to do is basically stipple all these colors on and make them look as irregular and kind of like organic as we can. So we're going to do that by, putting light marks and then filling them with dark dots to make them look like pits. We're going to make some wet oh, I've already got this color, but I guess we don't need any more of that. So, I'm going to put them all side by side just to make it easier to follow. So there's my orange highlight, or highlight orange, rust orange, auburn shadow, and I'm going to grab all that purple, and I'm going to move it over there. Won't need much of that. There we go. Now, this is going to cover over a lot of the highlighting we already did on the armor. Okay, it's going to really dull it down. So we want this to it's going to get light quite quickly. So I'm going to start with like the darker colors. I'm going to make fairly light highlights with the stippling of orange. So I'll start by using some auburn shadow. Do highlights within that with stippling dots of the rust orange. Lighter highlights with the orange highlight. I'll add some ivory into the mix as well, do even lighter highlights. And then I'm going to go back down and put the purple dots in the middle of that to make it look like cracks and holes and pitting. And then finally we'll go back and we'll highlight certain ones with the lighter colors to make them look like cracks and damage. The other thing we can do is a little bit of kind of water effects. What would you call it? I don't know if glazes is the right word, but let's take some rust orange. Let's just do it and you see what I mean. And we're going to make this as thin as that purple wash we used at the start. Really, really thin. Okay, really, really thin. And then what we can do is we take that color, and if we put a bead of this on the mini, it's going to dry and make a water stain, okay, like a tide mark. So that, when it dries, it's going to look kind of gross and irregular. And then if we come back and do our dots over top of that, the two are going to work together to give us a natural looking kind of rust effect. So I'm going to do some wet dots on this parts down low in here. And these are going to be barely visible, but they will kind of enhance the overall rust look. I'm going to do some in this pitted areas out here on the shield, and they're going to flow into some of the lower areas. I want to try not to do too much where I want it to be dark on the shadows on the bottom. I'll just put some of these wash-like blobs on the leg armor, anywhere that like water could sit. Like picture this guy sitting in a dungeon with the water dripping on his head for millennia, running down his shoulders, getting caught in his armor. That's where this color is going to sit, is any of those spots. So like it might run down the side of his helmet, get into the little bits of that bit of scale mail, and then catch in that little crevice there. And it might look like a lot when it first goes on, but once it dries, it's almost invisible. You can see right there, it's really just about disappeared. So you don't want to like fully flood the model with this stuff, but you can put a fair amount of this on and know that when it dries, if you've made it thin enough, right, this is how thin I'm using the paint here. Okay, it's quite thin. It's not going to really obscure any of the work you've done so far. It's just going to kind of sit on top of it, and all that irregular painting is going to show through it. So do a little bit on the bracer, a little bit on these pauldrons, both sides, some on the chest, and let's go put some on the clothing right there, because the water's going to go down and drip and sit on that, and it's going to stain it. Let's do some on the back of the cloak down there as well. Put a little bit along the side of the cloth there by the little armor in the front there. A little bit more on his leg. A bit more on that knee bit. I'm restricting myself to this upper kind of quarter or half of the model up here. Because remember I said I want the bottom to look very dark and the top to be quite a bit lighter. So we're just kind of playing around. This doesn't have to be done in any set manner. Like, just kind of think to yourself, where would the water pool? Where's rust going to grow? And that's where you want this to land. It's okay if you stain other things with it. Like, I got some on the horn there. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. This guy literally has been like, had water dripping on him for millennia. He's got thousands of spiders all over him. He's got rust, and there's mice have been creeping all over him, making their nests in his armpit. So he's filthy. And I don't know what woke him up. Well, I do know what he was woken up by. The call of some evil artifact sent magic his way and woke him up, just like in that movie, the Black Cauldron we were talking about earlier. So he's been called to duty, called to his undead work. In the back of the blade there, just dibs and dabs of the orange here and there. And as it dries, it gives that really dull look, orange rusted look to the metal. Now you can do a fair amount of this, like I said. When we get to the next stage, this is where kind of less becomes more, right? When we start doing the real corrosion dots, this is going to provide a nice backdrop for it. Okay, but we don't need to. We don't want to overdo it at that stage. Okay. I like it. That's looking pretty good. And it's drying pretty quickly. I'm seeing now that I could have gone a whole level lighter with my cloth. That's okay. Well, let's give that a moment to dry. Let's do that. I'm going to grab a little bit of the ivory, throw it into my orange mix over there. This is for the cloak, and the other pieces. I'm going to go a whole level lighter and keep going. So where am I going to do this? I'm going to do this on the top of his thumb, looking for little creases and joints, tiny little dots, just to bring up the thumb shape a little bit better. Forefinger, middle finger, just a bit. Top of the ring finger, sure, that's enough. Oh, that pinky would show. Let's do that. Tip of the pinky. There we go. Bring the shapes out a little bit. This little scoop in the cloth is going to catch the light, so let's give it a few little extra dots, that bit up there. Anywhere the light would catch. Nothing down here needs this. The top of this arm, I think, does. A little bit just where the light would catch coming across. There we go. Something like that. bring the shapes up a little bit. Well, it's not the shapes that I'm bringing up, it's the edges. This is not like a typical edge highlight, but it is kind of where the light would be catching. And it's catching because these edges are raised. Okay? And because of the light direction that we chose, they appear to be kind of extended further and more accessible to that light from that direct direction. There we go, back of the hand. Let's do a little bit on those sharper edges on the cloak. And I'm not just doing the edges, I'm doing some of the flat areas as well, where the light would hit it directly. Just dots, tiny little dots and dashes and scratches and wiggles to bring the details into focus. Okay, I like it. Okay, so now what we're going to do is I'm going to come back. I'm going to grab the auburn shadow, and I'm using, like I said, a brush with a tip in very good condition. So I've got a very fine point on this thing, and I'm going to just put dots of this color on the armor. Now this is one of our darker colors. The value of this is pretty close to that dark brown we painted the armor. So this is going to look a bit like pits. And then we're going to go over it with this color and that color. Then we're going to come back and put like corrosion holes with that stuff. So where is this color going to go? It's going to go in a ring, kind of like that, concentrating on the direction of the light for the most part. Okay, let's do the sword. That's a pretty easy spot to do to start with. So I see I got my shiny edge, and I'm going to put dots of this on the edges facing towards the light for the most part. You can think about it as like kind of tracing and defining the shape with dots of rust, making it more visible. So that's a cut, and that's a cut that we're going to make shiny later. Same with that one right there. We're going to make those more visible later on. So there we go. That's got some rust on it. We'll do the back of the blade the same way, but we can do more if we want to, because this side is in the shadow. So this is almost like the highlight color of rust on the shadow side. Might still be too light for that, but we also don't want to overdo it. So I'm just going to do a few little scritches and scratches like that, and that'll be enough for that. Top of the hilt and the edge of the hilt, same idea. Doesn't have to be everywhere. And it's okay if the dots overlap, but you want them to be small, okay? So like my dots that I'm making are tiny like this. They're all different directions, okay? What you don't want to do is big marks like that. That does not look like rust. But it's okay if the dots overlap each other, because the rust and corrosion kind of grows, right? It grows and spreads. It runs downhill with drips of water, but it doesn't just form big smooth dash marks. So this is where you want to practice your fine dot making. What am I doing for time? Pretty good. Okay, so the hilt down there, same idea. I'm going to keep the highest highlight there free of this color. A little bit of that shininess to show through. And I'm just going to do this outside of that area. Well, you notice that the tip of my brush is splitting a little bit. I don't really mind that. When I'm done here later, I'll clean that up. Main thing is don't like mash the brush into the model. You're just making fine dots. So just a light touch, just little delicate dips and dabs and dashes. Those be enough to make this work. There we go. And I'm going to put some on the back of the leather as well, because it's like that dripped there and stained it, okay? Even though that is not a piece of metal. In our store, that's not a piece of metal. Front of the bracer, little tiny dots, not too many. This pauldron, I'm going to do some dots. What I said about making sounds, short sounds, small dots. There we go, something there. Little dots. So what do you do if you make a dot that's too big? Well, we don't really worry about it. We just try not to put any more dots in the same spot. And later, when we come back to do the dots for the corrosion, the purple dots, we'll eat away at that accidental big dot. So if you make a mistake, it's not the end of the world. Don't try to like flood it and, you know, put water all over it and wash it off, because all these other dots are still drying and you don't want to reactivate them and accidentally destroy your work. So just let them dry. If you make ones that are too big, let them dry, and then we'll eat away with them with the purple later on. I'll do some here in a second that are too big, and I'll fix them at the later stage when we get there. There we go. Lots of rusty dots. Ah, I like it. He's looking good. Okay. Do the helmet now. Same idea. Cool. Yeah, I like it. This guy's going to be the champion of my D&D game. Players are going to learn to hate him. He's going to be a recurring bad guy, I think. I used to love those books as a kid. The Chronicles of Prydain. Author was a guy named Lloyd Alexander. Pretty cool. Celtic mythology and lots of witches, and some of the stuff's pretty silly. I mean, it's aimed at, like, not really kids, but young adults. So there's some pretty deliberately foolish characters. But one of my favorite books nonetheless. Okay, getting there. Now again, I don't want to put a lot of detail in the lower spot because that's going to attract your eye to it. We're going to avoid doing that. But I will put some of this up on this part of the armor. So I'll put a big blob of orange there, way too big. There we go. There's a big blob of orange. That's not what we want. I'll fix that one later. And we'll do some small ones as well. Now, yeah, just come along nicely. And do some more orange dots on the shield. So as I mentioned earlier, that in my idea about this guy, like the gem is somehow tied to the magic that's animating him. So the gem is going to look pretty clean. I'm not going to put junk over the gem. There we go. Now, we're going to start highlighting all the rust with a lighter rust color. So let's grab that, well, rust orange. Put a bunch of dots of that. This is a really saturated orange color. Like, it can be used for orange fire OSL and that kind of stuff. So this is one that you want to be careful not to do like really too much of it. We'll really focus this with small dots and pretty much try to keep them like in zones in the center of where you've already done a lot of orange dots. So like here on the sword, there's already a bunch of orange dots there. So I'll put these ones close to those ones and run them along the edges of shapes to help define shapes a little bit better. But this is quite a bright color. It's quite visible. So we don't want to overdo this color. A few on the back of the orb there, the pommel. The bracer. Put a few in the armor there. See the back of the sword. A few in the bracer. or the hilt, bracer, not too many. And when we do the next color is very desaturated, so that's going to dull these down a bit, and then they're going to get further dulled down when we do the purple pitting in the center of these rusty areas. Okay, and that's really going to help. The other thing you can do that really looks cool is purple wash. So make your own little purple wash of like imperial purple or something like that, and just put little dots and dabs and dashes of wash, the same as we did with the orange, and that makes it look oily and like there's an oil slick associated with the rust as well. It looks pretty cool. So on the helmet, just a few kind of towards the light source, edge of those little rings around his horns, only a couple on the one side away from the light. There we go. Looking very rusty. Now, we haven't done this side of the pauldron yet. His chest. Remember, less is more in this one. It's a very bright color. Now, people often recommend, change the orientation, the mini, change the direction of your brush strokes to make it look more organic. When I'm painting like this, I have to hold the model in exactly the same place to keep it on camera. But what I do is I rotate the brush, because the brush tip tends to get compressed. So if I just keep turning the brush, that also introduces a little bit of a randomness to the look of the dots, and that can help as well with that. If it's too symmetrical, if they're all too much the same, it starts to look like brush strokes instead of an organic sort of chemical effect, and that we don't want that. We want to avoid that from happening. Okay, so there's that big blob that I made earlier, which is way too big. So we're going to start breaking that up a little bit with these dots. I want to keep that zone under there pretty dark. There we go. That works for me. Creepy looking dude. Okay. So now we're going to go to the next orange color, which is highlight orange, another favorite color of mine from Reaper. This is a much more sort of desaturated orange. It's intended to be used for as a red hair triad. And so it's kind of meant to be lighter and less saturated, and it works really good for highlighting rusty orange and stuff like that. I'll do this over here on this little patch here, and you'll be able to see how it kind of breaks up the look of the rust while still giving it a highlight. It breaks up that richer rust orange. It still darkens a little bit as it dries, and it kind of fades into the background, but if we hit it on lots of these raised areas, it's going to help define those shapes, make them more visible, but tie into the rust effect that we're looking for, that corrosion, all that green stuff, or good stuff, not green stuff. All right, making progress. Once you get the feel for doing little tiny dots, it goes pretty fast. This is, you would think, like, why would you do it like this instead of like just using a chemical product that's going to give you a rust effect? And those look really cool. Like, they give you a nice, really organic looking effect. They have a raised texture. They go on pretty quick. but you do give up a little bit of control when you use those. And I like being able to control where the light is. And I find with that kind of product, or with the some of the enamel products, you just kind of have to let it go where it wants to go. And if I'm trying to do something with lighting, like object source lighting on this guy, I want to control where the highlights are. And this lets me control that. And as you can see, it doesn't take long. The dots of paint are dry almost before your brush lifts off of them. And you have a lot of control. And it doesn't take very long to do this. I mean, we've been painting this guy about 90 minutes now. And we're getting a really good looking effect. Well, I like it. And it's coming into effect really, really fast. Now, where have I missed? A few along this edge along there. Oh, see now, those are too big. And what's happened is I got a drop of paint dried on the tip of the brush, like that. And that's what caused that to happen. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to clean my brush out. And so now the brush, even though it's going to be cleaned out, I'll wipe it off on the paper towel. There's going to be a lot of water still inside the brush. And that is what pushes the paint out of the brush and causes floods. So I want to be sure that I get most of the water out. And I'm definitely going to do some test dots on my thumb before continuing, to be sure that there's not so much water in this that it's going to start. Because we've done a lot of good work. We don't want to wreck it by... And see, those dots have quite a bit of water in them. I think we're going to be okay, but we just want to be cognizant that we could get bigger dots than we want because of the water content that's in the brush now. Yeah, a little bit bigger. So we had done, oh yeah, we're working in here. There we go. And I'll break those ones up with the purple when the time comes. There we go. He's looking rusty. His armor might be rusty, but his fighting skills aren't. Neighbors. It's the kind of dumb thing you say when you're playing D&D, I guess. Yar, his fighting skills. Why are all undead pirates? Must be the effect of the Pirates of the Caribbean movie. Yar, the undead they be. This is where my glow effect is going to be. So I don't want to have too much going on in there. A little bit of this will help. Not too much though. On the outside up there. At the top where the light's going to hit, we're going to lighten that. Define it with some rusty blobs. Let's do the back of the blade a little bit too, just to get the shape visible. There. Got a well-defined sword going on. We're gonna do more orange. The top of his shoulder, right in there, I seem to be missing that spot. You can see that right in there. There's gonna be lots of light hitting that. So I need to go back in there, darken it down, or at least cover the shine a little bit. That's the downside of not having, not being able to flip the model around quite so easily because I'm holding it in the position for filming. That's one of the downsides, but we'll get there. We'll get her fixed. Get him fixed. Get him looking. If you're out there still listening, Greg, and I see a few others are out there, let's keep in mind that we're also streaming this on a Discord, and if you're interested, you can always come over and join us on the Discord. It's on Miniature Monthly side, and yeah, happy to chat. Okay, let's get back into the painting. And if I miss you in the chat, just I apologize. I've got 3 or 4 chat windows open, 3 chat windows open, and I can't see them all at the same time. Just be patient with me. All right, we need more orange. More orange. Now, I just added a little too much water into that. I'm just going to be careful. Test on my finger again. Yeah, it stood all right. So where did I miss? I missed the top of his helmet. Let's see if we can orient it to the light direction. There we go. You can see it now, I hope. Right in there. We missed some spots. So we're going to bring out the shape of his, I was going to say chrome dome, but it's not. It's the opposite of a chrome dome. By hitting with a few of these little dots. Really bring up the rust. There we go. So we're highlighting with the rust to define the shapes. Let's do a little bit back on that shoulder too. Even though it's kind of in the shadow zone, we'll do a little bit back there as well. Okay, now we need to go back the other way, and we got to do dark colored dots in the same way. And this is going to look like pitting, okay? It's going to give the optical illusion of raised, rough areas of rust with holes in them, like flakes of rust sitting on the surface. So we want to look for anywhere that we want to make it look darker. So like the edge of that giant blob that I made on purpose. I'm going to put some of these dark dots in there, and that's going to darken it all down again, break up the outline of that orange blob. Now, I got some light dots on the edge of that ring, and I'm going to put little marks into them, and that's going to look like corrosion and flakes, make it look 3D. There we go. Kind of broke up that shape. And we'll do the same thing out in these zones. We're going to look for little depression areas and put dark blobs in them, or areas where we might have a little bit too much of the light colored orange, and we put little marks in them to break them up as well. And that's going to help with that illusion of it being rust. It's going to exaggerate the 3D effect a little bit too, which is what I want. They can all beat up and busted. Okay, so that's that part of the shield's looking pretty rusted up now. Need to darken this zone down here. That's too light for what I was intending. I want it to look pretty spooky, so we're going to darken all that up. And a few in these zones can look like pits and scratches. Got a little bit of a dried paint blob on the tip of my brush that I'm going to have to remove. It's kind of stopping the paint from flowing the way I want it to. Okay, let's bring back that darkness that I wanted on the bottom of the Mini. Now, I've also lost a little bit of the shape of the shield, so I'm going to put a little line of dark dots along there to bring the shape of the shield back. And up in there. So this is a bit like black lining, except I'm doing it with little dots of black. Gonna bring the shapes back. There, I like it. Now, where else do I need to do this? I think that epaulette, or what do they call those, pauldron, needs some. Just a few like that. Not too much. Make it look really pitted. This piece here is basically untouched, so I'm going to do quite a few on there. There we go. A regular shadowy look. There we go. Lots of damaged bits in there. Okay, there we go. Have I got anywhere else that I missed? Probably those need to be darkened along there. You just deepen the shadow along the back of his leg a bit with some dark purple marks. Under each of these little those bits of his armor, I'm just going to deepen the shadow under there with some additional purple dots so it's less reflective. Its outline gets broken up a bit and it's harder to focus on, harder to see. So the focus will stay, when somebody just kind of casually looks at the Mini, the focus will stay at the top around his head where that glow is going to be in a few minutes. That's the plan. Alright, that cloak is looking way too nice, too clean. So we're just going to put some damage into it with the black, with the nightshade purple, some dots and dashes and slashes. And we'll put some dots in the low area. This is different than doing the rust. I'm not trying to make pits and marks. I'm just kind of putting dark color into the low spots in the folds to really accentuate them. But again, because it's a bit irregular, your eye kind of fills in the detail as being like it's dirty and ragged and torn. And there we go. Bottom part of the cloak over there. Let's make it darker. Let's do some dots on that pauldron. Bottom of the helmet. So the idea, again, we're defining the shapes with our texture, making things look rusted and corroded and broken and beat up when they're not. A little bit of an optical illusion. All right, so there's a cut in the blade there, like a big scratch out of it. So we're gonna emphasize that scratch. Another one there. Another one there. The sword is just about busted. And we want that to be quite evident. More dark dots. Break up the rust a little bit more on the blade. Break it up a little bit more on the helmet there. I mean, you can do as much or little of this as you want. And if you do too much, like you put a big blob like that and you don't want it, you can always just go back and grab one of the darker colors, go back again, and put the dots back over top of it. Bring back the rusty look. It's So it's a bit like shading, where you want to push and pull and make things lighter, make things darker. It's the same idea, but you're doing it with rusty dots. Okay, and there he is. So the next thing we need to do, as I said earlier, we're going to do a glaze on the horns. I'm going to do that glaze, I think, with the brown, the black and brown. So I'm going to make this color really, really thin. I'm also letting things dry, and I'm going to go back in with the metallic paint to give him a few shiny scratches where, like, he recently swung his sword and hit somebody. I'll do that in a minute. So for now, I'm making a glaze out of this brown. It's going to be very thin, not much there to it, and I'm going to take this color, I'm going to pull it the length of the horn out towards the tip, and I do it in little streaky lines, and that's going to give it the irregular look of an old cow horn. And so it's going to tint it, it's going to create texture, but it's so thin that it will not obscure. It'll slightly obscure, but not completely obscure the those highlights I did with the ivory earlier. So it changes the color, but I still have a highlight. And do that on both horns. The tips look like dirty old brown cow horns. Sorry about that. There we go. And if you feel like it's not brown enough, you can just repeat it until you get it the color you want it to be. Bear in mind, we're not looking for clean, beautiful, magical looking horns. We want it to be a bit irregular. Now the only thing I'm not seeing there that I want is the edge of the horn is not well defined against the helmet like it is there. So I'm going to grab some Nightshade Purple, and I'm going to thin it just a little bit so that it flows smoothly. And I'm going to get my finest tipped brush, which after today is probably not this one I've been doing all the rust effects with, but that's the one in my hand. And I'm going to do a black line at the base of the horn where it meets up against the rust, just to kind of bring the shape to be similar to the other side. I'll do that on that side too, so they're pretty much identical. Need a very, very thin line, thin as you can manage. We'll just pretend I didn't spot a mold line and keep going. I swear there's no mold line there. Didn't happen. Did not happen. There. That'll work. Okay. Now those horns are better defined. And if you mess up doing something like this, what do? Well, we can make it really wet. We can flood that purple over top of stuff. Right? There's just a faint little bit of purple in my brush. We can put that over things to kind of push our rusty freehand effect a little bit into the background. Or if we do it too much, we can just go back and put some more rusty dots on there and bring it back up again. Okay. Now, I'm liking that. That's looking all right. And the camera is still freaking out over that greenish blue glow in the middle, which is what I want it to do. That's good. Okay, so now, what do we have left to do? We have to do a little bit of highlighting for scratches. So I'm going to grab another silver paint. This is a silver airbrush paint, but you could also take your Reaper paint there, thin it with a bit of flow improver, get the paint to flow a little bit more smoothly. What we don't want to do is end up thinning the paint with a lot of water, because you'll lose control of it. And what we're going to do is we want to make very, very fine lines for the scratches, okay? Now, why do I have the airbrush paint? Because I find that this particular paint, the honed steel, does not show up on camera very well. Okay, so if I do those lines like that on my thumb, they're nearly invisible, okay? Nearly invisible. So I'm going to do those with this airbrush paint so that they're more, so that they're easier to see. Okay, so what you want is, I'm going to use this synthetic brush because it's brand new. It's got a nice point on it. Not too much paint on the brush, but you want it to flow. We don't want to flood, for sure. I'm going to test it on my finger. Okay, that's too much paint coming out there. I'm going to just dab some of that off. Work the brush again. See how we're doing now. It's a bit better. So there's a little tiny mark. So what I'm looking for is anywhere that there's a deep scratch, like in the shield here. This bright, fresh silver, in my mind, it's the undead guy has just been fighting some adventurers. So these are fresh scratches. And you want to keep the purple at the top as the shadow being cast by the cut. And then this silver goes on the lower edge where the light is catching the clean, fresh edge where the blade cut in, okay? So there's one. There's going to be another one on this side. Like that. Okay, there should be just a bit visible where the kind of like where the fresh metal is exposed. So those were ones that I cut with a file into Mini. Here's ones that are faked. Okay, those ones are fake. They're just like bits of rust damage that have been highlighted. Let's do another one right here. Okay, shiny there. The sword. We're going to do some on the sword. Now, the ones on the sword that were sculpted are not very deep. So we're going to make them look deeper by highlighting the lower edge, the edge away from the light with a bit of silver paint. And this is going to get caught by the natural light, and it's going to look like glinting, shiny, freshly scraped or scratched metal. Okay, where the blade has been hit by something recently. Where else do we want to do that? That might be enough, actually. It doesn't really need much. Definitely, this is a less is more sort of situation. Do a little bit on the back of that scratch. And the edge of this scratch, going to catch the light from the front. Same with this one. And there's another little one there that will do. So what do you do if you make these too big? Well, you go back in and you repaint them with black, or with our nightshade purple, which we're using as our black to make them go away. And then you can redo them. Try again. Okay, there he is. Now, what do we got left to do? We got gemstone. So the gemstone, we started out, we put a couple of coats of our jade green on there. So this color is going to get preserved. Now we're going to start putting layers of darker color towards the light source. It's the invert of what you might expect. Okay? So let's do that. So each ring of color that we apply is going to be smaller than the previous one, and they're kind of stacked towards the light source. So I'm going to turn the model upside down. We can still see that. I'll start here and pull this away from that rim. towards the light. So what I've got already there is desaturated. Now I'm going to put a couple of layers of saturated green to kind of bring the color of the gem into play. And then I'm going to darken the green. And that's the part of the gem where the light is transmitting through, but you're not seeing a reflection off of it. There's this illusion of being darker. Okay. So concentric rings going towards my light source that way. Now let's add, what color do I want to add into that? I'm not sure if the purple will work. Oh, well, let's find out. A little bit of purple, lots of green. So we just want this to darken just a touch. It's going to be like an old jade color. That's too much purple. This purple is really strong. There we go. More like that. Okay, so this one, same idea. It's going to be a circle inside the previous circle, and it's going to get darker towards the light direction. So that's the direction that my brush strokes are pulling, is towards the light. And I'll just go right away, grab a darker color. I'm going to do the same thing. So this is like a sequence of progressively darker jade greens. Getting more and more desaturated. Okay. And now I'm going to be putting mostly purple. Still has some green in it, but it's mostly purple. I'm going to do the same thing again. Brush strokes go towards the light, and this disc only comes about halfway down the length of the gem. Really goes towards the light. Oop. Made some little mistakes there. Because it's kind of unstable holding it in that position to stay on the camera. You can see my gem coming along though, alright. And I could just go straight to black right now. I don't really feel like I want to. I'm going to glaze a little bit of that green back over that. I feel like I went a little too dark. So I'll make a glaze of the jade green. And I'm going to go from the dark towards the light. The dark color towards the light color, I mean. And then I'm going to pull from the light color back into the mid-tone. Bring some of the green color back. There we go, that's what I want. Something like that. And now, so we've got our light source coming this way. So I'm going to put a reflection in the gem, but I'm not going to use my pure white. I want to save that for my for the eyes on this guy. So I'm going to use the ivory for it instead. That's probably a mistake, but we'll see how it looks. If I don't like it, I can always go back and add the pure white in the center of the reflection. So I'm going to put one dot facing towards the light. So right about there. And because I'm feeling saucy, I'm going to take my green, my what's this? My Phantom Glow blue. And I'm going to put a little dot of that next to the other one, kind of pretending like it's reflecting the face of the secondary light source being that guy's eye. So I got two little lights. That's almost invisible on the camera, isn't it? Well, it shows up on the mini pretty clearly. So I get a little bit of extra light source there. And we're getting pretty close to done with this guy now. It's looking pretty good. So now what we have to do is our glowing effect. All right, so gonna go back. I'll use a smaller brush, I think. ask if there's any questions at the moment. Doesn't look like. All right. So I'm going to redo the white dot in the center. And the reason for that is to get that spot to the highest value I can pull off. And this is why I did not use this for the gem, because I'm saving the white for the center of my light source. Can you see what I'm doing on camera? Yeah. I'll reach that right in the center there and redo that white. And in the middle of his mouth. We want that to be as light as we can get it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my mix of white and phantom glow. And I'm going to paint that color around the outside of that white thing that I just did. Top of the words have lost. I've lost my words. So the top of the cheek on the skull, around his the orbit, around the eye, side of the mandible, chin, these areas that we want to have show up. Okay, there we go. Now we need to have this color appear in a few other spots to get the illusion right. So I'm going to thicken up my mix just a little bit. And I'm going to paint a little bit of that color on the inside of the nose guard, just a touch, like it's shining up the nose guard. And I'm going to put a little bit of it on the inside, like it's like a little bit edge highlighted around the helmet. In the camera, yeah. So where that light is catching the inside of the helmet, just a little bit. Just a little bit. Do the same thing on the opposite side. Being careful not to get rid of that shadow we put in earlier at the first step, that dark brown. There we go. So now we get a little bit of a green glow going on around his face. And I'm going to put a little bit of this, just a little bit of this, on the sword blade. And so the sword blade is kind of catching that color. Now we know we already dulled that sword blade down. It should not be super reflective. We just want a little bit of that color to catch those different shapes. So this color is going to be visible mostly where we have shiny, fresh metal showing. So I didn't completely cover my scratches that I made earlier, just a little bit of this color outside of that. Where else do we put a little bit of this color? Let's do... I'm gonna feel like that's enough, but whatever. Let's do a little bit more. I'm gonna put just a little bit on the corner of that piece of armor, just a bit, like that, and a little bit right there, just where the light might catch it, a little bit like that. And that's probably too much already. I don't care. Let's do a little bit as though the light's catching off of his eye and reflecting from there. Just the smallest amount. That's probably going to be enough. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a glaze of that same color, which is probably a mistake because this color is very chalky. And we're going to do a little bit of an experiment. Let's see if it'll work. I just want to glaze a little bit of this color on there. And I just realized that this is the same color as copper verdigris. So this is going to look like copper corrosion more than like light. And I'm just going to put this very thin glaze, right, barely any paint, just a little bit of it, like a little halo around those reflection points that I built earlier. So like that's a dot on the pommel, so I put a little bit of this color around the outside of that, and I pull in towards the center of the reflection as though it's kind of like a color. Thanks. Like my normal approach to OSL is to like just light it up, right? But trying to go for something a little bit more subtle today. Got to learn sometime, I guess. So then same thing with these ones out here. I'm going to start away from them. I'm going to pull this glaze away from the metal and out towards that light, or to those reflections, just a little bit. So I'm getting a bit of a blended transition from no light to where it's catching the light. And because I'm putting the same color back over top of those little dots, it's increasing the color saturation out there, while at the same time giving a little bit of illusion of the light catching further out. Just the faintest amount. Because remember, we do have a dominant light source here, right? Like the light coming this way is clearly the strongest. So we don't want to, like this light would have to be really, really intense to overwhelm that. We just want it a little bit visible. Just a little bit. And that's why backlighting is so effective, because the glow bouncing off the ground and coming back might be enough to kind of overwhelm the light, like to be visible within the shadow. But that's not what we're doing here today. We're giving him a glow from his helmet. Just a little bit. And making him look creepy. So even though the light from the eyes can't hit there, you can think about, Aaron always says this. In fact, in some of Aaron's videos, he gives a very clear and careful description of how this works, where, you know, there's like a haze, like the air and the dust and the moisture in the air, the smoke from the fireball that went off, all that stuff is hanging in the air, and the light is going to illuminate those, and it's going to have like a haziness around the light source. So that's, even though the light wouldn't be visible on the helmet in these positions, I'm giving the illusion of that halo of light in the area surrounding the light source. And it works pretty cool. A little bit more of that down there in that shadow. And a little bit of the same effect on the shield. Always have to remember that these glazes darken as they dry, and this particular color can be quite chalky. So I'm doing a little bit of glaze, letting it dry a little bit, move to another area, do a little bit of glaze, let it dry, move to another area. And if it's not dark enough, I can come back and do it again. But if I do it too dark all in one go, it's kind of a one-way trip. So we just do it a little bit at a time, and that's enough. Hope Aaron will be proud of me. I didn't just get out the airbrush and create a value sketch for the OSL. Just enough light to be a little bit visible. That sword blade is probably too bright. But I kind of like it. I kind of like it that way. And I wonder if maybe his leg would reflect some of that. I don't think it really would. But I'm going to put a little bit of this color, just a touch of it, so that if somebody really wanted to go looking for it, they'd be able to find it. There. Up there on that thing. And if they don't go looking for it, their brain will interpret it as being, you know, corrosion. I kind of like that. He looks very different in person than he does on the screen, I have to tell you. The camera software can't really deal with the contrast between the center of the light source and the surrounding area. and that's why it looks so blown out on your screen. I'll take photos of him, and there'll be a photo in the video that we post online so you can see what he really looks like. Last thing I'm doing now is I'm taking my glaze, and I'm going to increase the color saturation of this blue in the areas immediately surrounding the light source, just because that's where the color is going to be strongest, and we want it to be visible. But I'm not going to cover over my zones of white right there in the center. I want to keep those as the areas of highest value. I lost my shadows there a little bit. So while the paint's still wet, I'm going to lift them back out with the tip of a sharp brush. And if I need to, I'll go back and paint them in again. I think I'm going to have to paint that one back in again. A little more on the side. There we go. That's what I wanted. Creepy looking undead guy. So for those small OSLs, small objects, like glowing objects, that's always the key, is to have a very clearly defined light source. The smaller it is, the brighter it's going to look, especially if you can get it up close to pure white in the center. A little bit of a higher value, like a mix of your light color and your white in a corona around that, so you've got a very high value zone but still with the color in it, and then a saturated zone outside of that, and then fade the color fairly quickly away from the light source, so desaturate it in the reflections, and and try to preserve your lightest color, your pure white or whatever it's going to be, for the center of the light source. If I didn't have the light source, then I would have used the pure white at the center of the gem, and that would be that. All right, so there's a couple of steps I don't usually show. I'm going to do those today because we've got a little bit of time left. And that's just finishing the base. So for the base on this, I'm going to paint the rim black. And I usually end up doing this a couple of times. But I'm going to paint it black so I can see really kind of if there's any like mistakes in the way that I sculpted the base or anything like that, so I can have a really, really clear boundary around the base. So I'll paint the rim of the base. What color is this? Dragon black. Now remember, I don't want this mini to be like calling your eye to the base. I don't want it to be really like a key part of the mini. I want the eye to really be on the top part of it and on the light source. Okay, I want that to be the part that stands out. And then secondary would be like his cool sword and his gem. Right? That's the primary and secondary focus. But what happens with a base like that, if you have just one color, the matte color still has a natural reflection to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create like a texture on it, like a stony texture, but with a very, very dark gray paint. And what that'll do is it'll kind of give it some definition, but it'll make it, it sounds weird, but it makes it less, makes it stand out less, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So right now you can clearly see all of those, the reflection of the light off of those stones, the natural light, and I want to suppress that. So I'm going to put a gray texture on there. I'm going to mix a bit of, I shouldn't be using my size 0 for that. Let's use a different brush to mix paint. Let's grab some of that ivory. We'll mix it in with Nightmare Purple or Nightshade Purple. And we're going to make a little bit of a gray color. There we go. Nice dark gray color. And we know that we've got a light source. I think it's just number 0. What's number 1? So we know that the light source is this way. Okay, it's coming from that direction. So there's going to be a drop shadow between his legs where the light's not going to hit at all. So I'm going to, in fact, you can kind of see that drop shadow. Actually, the camera angle makes it impossible. I'll just paint it in. So that's what the drop shadow looks like between his feet. So you want that to be really dark. Okay, you can see that now. I've painted it in. The camera's trying to figure out what I've done. It's right in there. Okay, because our light's coming this way. The shield is going to cast a bit of a shadow over here. So I'll put drop shadow for the shield. And the shadow is going to be smaller than the object. That's why the shadow is smaller than his leg and smaller than his body. The shadow is going to be smaller than his shield. Because I'm assuming the light source is fairly, well, maybe the shadow should be bigger. If it was a small light source, close up, the shadows are going to be pretty big. I think it's a weak light source, fairly distant. So the shadows are going to be fairly small. That's my story. I'm sticking with it. If you don't like it, well, send your complaints to management. And I'm going to make this part of the base darker as well. Not quite as dark, but sort of halfway between this color and the drop shadow. There's a little bit of a haziness to our shadow. It's not super sharply defined. Same thing right there, a little bit of haziness. Okay, and if I really wanted to change the overall look, like if I felt like this is not dark enough, I could glaze now with this nightshade purple and pull the glaze from the boundary of my highlight and pull it down into the shadows to darken that side even further. Now, nightshade purple is one of those colors that has a slight satiny sheen to it when it dries. Just very slight. So it's just something to be cognizant of, that can make the shadowing not as effective, but I know, kind of like that. It's looking very dark now. And I'm going to do that same glaze on the inside of this leg in here. I'm going to darken that down even further because that's not getting the light source directly, so we're going to dull that down. Inside of this leg the same way. Bottom of his clothing on the front, we're going to really darken and dull that down. And I didn't say it, but I did the inside of the shield the same way. Okay, really darken that down, shadowed. There we go. So now he's looking really dark. But because this is all brightly lit up at the top, we get the sensation of him just kind of hovering in midair above his base, right? Oh, look at that. I made a mess. I got a big splot of water on the base. So how do we clean that up? We take a damp brush and we lift that right back off again. There we go. Gone. Dry in a couple seconds. There we go. All right, so I'm going to take that gray paint I made a few moments ago, and now know where my main shadows are going to be, right? So I'm just going to very lightly put a texture on the stones where the light's going to hit them directly, but I make sure I don't put any of these textures and marks and things. I'm just going to make sure I don't put any of these marks and textures and things inside the shadows that I just painted. I just want enough for the base to look like it's finished and to bring out the shapes of the stones just enough that it kind of overcomes the look of that natural reflectiveness, and in the end it looks less obvious. Okay, it looks a little bit darker than it would if I just left it with a purple on it. That's my perception anyway. Maybe I'm wrong. Who knows? But I like the way that looks. And I'm just going to push it back in. Just a little bit of that nightshade purple over it. Just push. It's like doing a freehand. You never just do the freehand and then leave it. You always put a little bit of a thin glaze of a color over it to kind of put it into the material. And then when that dries, it's going to look very dark, but it'll look defined. And then I don't have quite the same effect of the natural reflection. So there he is. He's done. It's a good looking undead guy. He's got his cool green gem. You could always do the green gem as a glowing effect, but I don't think we need to on this guy. That OSL on the blades might be a little bit too strong, but I like it. There he is. After I finished painting Rictus the Undying here during the live stream, I had another look at him, and I decided that I really wasn't very happy with the final look of the glow effect coming from the skull. I previously had the two eyes looking quite like very bright white as a source of the OSL, and his mouth was white as well, and it looked really strange, very clown-like. You couldn't really tell that it was a skull. So I went back, I reduced the level of lighting. I got rid of the glow effect from the center of the eyes, left the skull very bright, left that blue-green color that was the phantom glow in place. And I expanded the amount of phantom glow in different spots on his armor. So he still looks like he's quite brightly lit, like in his center, but he no longer looks like he has a strange glowing eye, glowing mouth, sort of clown face. And I'm much happier with the final look of him now. As you can see, there's quite a bit more of that glow color in different spots on him, but he's still very, very dark on the bottom, and that has the effect that I was looking for of having him seem sort of disembodied and mostly just a torso and head, sword, shield, that kind of thing. Yeah, so made some final modifications, and this is the final version. And there'll be photos, close-up photos of him here as well. All right, I'm happy with that, and we'll see you for the next one.